Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week I've got something new and fun that we are going to be working on today, and that is this little board right here. This is the DCDigital HW2. It's the newest revision of the DCDigital, and it's made by PixelFX. The older version was made by Dan Kuntz on his own with Black Dog Tech, and it was really one of the first of its kind that allowed you to get direct HDMI out of this console right here, the Sega Dreamcast. That thing's been out for several years now, and it's pretty awesome, although compared to the modern HDMI mods, it's missing quite a number of features. So the new DCDigital, by comparison, has quite a lot of new functionality available to it. So today what we're going to do is we're going to take this brand new Dreamcast here, and we're going to go ahead and install the new DCDigital, and I'm going to add in a few other things as well. All right, let's get to it. Okay, so I'm getting ready to install the new DCDigital into this brand new Dreamcast right here. But first, I just wanted to show you a comparison between the original version of the mod and the current one. So this is an older DC HDMI, which got renamed to DCDigital at some point or another. And I just wanted to put them side by side so that you can see just how identical in shape these two boards are. And they perfectly superimpose. So what that means is that if you bought this older DCDigital and you want to upgrade to the later revision, my understanding is that you simply need to uninstall this board and then install the flex cable, the smaller flex, and the original flex that is on the main PCB is identical. You don't have to do anything differently there. So swapping out the hardware from number 1 to number 2 should be pretty straightforward. But we're not doing that today. I just kind of wanted to show you because I happen to have one of these in my personal stock, just to show you what they look like and show you that, yeah, they're exactly the same physical shape. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and disassemble the Dreamcast. That's actually really easy. There's only Phillips screws holding everything in place, and really just a matter of keeping track of where all of them go. So I'm not gonna bother you guys with any of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and disassemble everything, and then we will be back in 1 second. Okay, so now that I have the Dreamcast disassembled, the first thing we're gonna do is just some very basic modifications to the shell and to the shielding, just before we get any of the fun stuff started. First thing, for the top, you've got to make a little snip right over here with some flush cutters, and then you can very easily bend this metal and get it out of the way using a pair of pliers. Okay, and that's all you got to do to the top. For the bottom shield, there is this piece of metal right over here, and that also needs to go. So normally what I do is I start by taking the pliers, flattening this out like so. You could also use a vise, but I don't own one of those. And then you can just kind of move the metal back and forth, and this should come off. Okay, so this bottom shield is good to go. All right, now we've got a few things to do on the bottom of the Dreamcast shell. The first thing is we're going to remove this standoff here. And then there are some Dreamcasts where they have a little indentation over here, and you can see that it kind of gets in the way and elevates the board when you place it where it's supposed to go, like that. So we're gonna go ahead and get some flush cutters and just snip that off as well. It does not have to be perfectly flush. It just has to be removed enough, because this shield is going to go here, like so. So as long as it's level with the shield, or there's nothing sticking up above the shield, then you're basically fine. All right, so that's the big stuff, more or less. We just have one more thing to do on the side right here. All right, so now we're going to cut a hole for the mini HDMI port, which is going to sit right about here. So the kit comes with this little jig right here that you can use to just make some pilot holes So that's what I'm going to do right now. When you place it in, what you got to do is count 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half, like this. So it has to be 4 and a half. Like, of course. Well, hopefully you get the idea. 4 and a half over to the left. So as you can see, the 3D print has a little bit of play. It does not fit tightly, and I think that's just because there's variability between different shells of the Dreamcast. So what you got to do then is just hold it in your hands, and I'm going to go ahead with a drill and just start making these pilot holes. Now we're going to flip it over, and we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Okay. Now, you'll notice that the jig also has an additional hole right here. This, I think, is for the recovery button, which is something new on the DC Digital that's not present with the older hardware revision. You can drill a hole to access that. Personally, I'm choosing not to. I want to keep this as unmodified as possible, just basically drilling out the mini HDMI and nothing else. All right, so now that I've got this pilot opening here, what I'm going to do is use a file like this one right here, and I'm also going to use my craft knife and just cut this out and make sure that everything fits. All right, so we'll be back in a second. Okay, so all of that filing work is finished, and you can see the opening right there, and you want something that is a nice and snug fit so that it just slides right in, and of course not too big so that the hole just looks sloppy. What I wanted to also show you is that the kit comes with like a little sticker, and this just shields it from making contact with the shield on the bottom there. So you just gotta put that on, and then this again should just slide right into place and should fit perfectly. Okay, so there's only 2 more things we need to do, and we just need to drill 2 pilot holes over here, and that's just so that the DC Digital is anchored into place. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just clean up all this little excess metal here, and then I'll screw it into place, and that is most of it, and we'll be back in a second. Okay, so the DC Digital is installed, and the only other thing we've got to do down here is just install this Wi-Fi antenna. So you're going to just insert it into this little socket, which always drives me nuts. I really struggle with this. Okay, well that took forever. But yeah, I just always have a hard time with that. So yeah, at this point now, we're just going to route the antenna like so. It's going to have to go up and over, and then we're just going to like attach it right over here. It has an adhesive to keep it in place. So just place it like about there, more or less, and that should be fine. Okay, so now let's get on to the fun stuff and start soldering. Okay, so we are ready to start installing the flex cable, which is going to go right about here. And as you can probably tell if you're familiar with the older DC Digital, this flex cable is, I think, exactly the same as the original one. So installing it is identical as far as I can tell. What we need to do first is start by just removing these two resistors right over here. So it's R609 and 610 right here. And so I just add solder to both sides of the surface mount resistor, and then they just come right off like that. Okay. I'm also going to go ahead and add some fresh solder to this ground point right here on this capacitor, just because it makes it a lot easier if it's already kind of pre-tinned with fresh solder. All right, so now that that's all set, I'm going to get some flux, and I'm just going to wick away the solder on these surface mount pads, just so that everything is very flat for us. Okay. So now everything is looking nice and clean and flat. So I'm going to go ahead and just clean that off with some ethanol, and then we're going to come back and get started with the flex cable installation. All right, so we're going to start by just tacking the flex cable onto this audio IC right here. And so you can see I'm just holding it down with my finger here, and I have it aligned where it's supposed to be. So that means that these first two pins down here are unoccupied, and then these top three pins over here are also unoccupied. That's where it should be. So again, I'm not going to try to do it perfectly right away. First thing I'm going to do is just try to get it aligned and tacked into place. Make sure I use plenty of flux. And right now I'm using a fine tip here. You can also use a chisel tip as well if you want to, but I just happen to have this one on, and this will also work for what I'm doing right now. So let me go ahead and just start by locking it down. Okay, that's just a couple of pins, and it's enough just to have it locked down. And so from here, the next step is going to be just making sure that everything is aligned on this chip right here. This is the video DAC, and as you can see, we need to solder pads on two sides of it. So it's really critical that the alignment is pretty good here. And you know, the good thing is that since I've only just tacked things down on the audio IC, if I need to, I can, you know, desolder that with some braid, and I can reposition things and try again. But as it stands, it looks like my initial attempt at alignment was pretty good here. So what I'll do now is continue tacking things down with this IC right here. And right now, I'm not even concerned if I'm making some small bridges, because I'm going to come back in here with some flux and clean this all up. And right now, yeah, I know there's some bridges over here, but again, right now I'm not really concerned about that, because I'm just trying to make sure my alignment is good and have everything tacked into place. And it does help if you have a pair of curved tweezers like this, because you can just use those to hold the flex cable down and have your hands out of the way, and just make sure that the pins are actually laying flush with the flex. Okay. All right, so that's good enough for now. What I'm going to do now is just switch to my binocular microscope off camera, just make sure everything is aligned, and then I'll be back in a second to finish up the soldering. All right, so I looked under the scope, and everything does in fact seem to be aligned properly, and I just went ahead and removed some of those bridges that I had right there. But now let's go ahead and tack in the ICs for real, and then go ahead, and there's other additional solder points that we need to go through and just take care of as well. Okay, so I've gone ahead and finished all of the soldering, and so you can see the additional points are right here on this pad, on this capacitor, these 2 points here, which is where those resistors used to be, the ground point right here, and right over here on this resistor. Otherwise, yeah, we're all done. So what I like to do now, before I go ahead and actually continue to the next step, is proofread my work a little bit just to make sure that the connections are good. So thankfully there's good troubleshooting information about all of the pins on the video DAC, and you can see that most of them connect up to these resistor packs right over here. So you can actually go and follow the connections using a multimeter and make sure that there's a connection between the legs of the IC and the respective points on the flex cable. So this is something I usually do just to verify my work. It's a little bit easier to do with finer points on your multimeter, but with these I can usually get the job done. And then of course you have to have a multimeter where you set the mode to continuity mode. It's basically this little audio icon on most multimeters, and then if there's a connection, you get a beep. So I'm gonna go ahead and just verify my work using the multimeter, and then we should be pretty much done. Aside from the video DAC, I also do test a few things on the audio DAC as well. You can also test these points here. They correspond to, yeah, right over here on the AV multi-out. And so if you don't have a connection on the AV multi-out, there's also can be issues. Yep, so those connections are good. All right, let me go ahead and meter this whole thing out, and then we're gonna proceed on to the next step. Okay, so the last little bit of soldering we have to do is on the underside of the Dreamcast, and this is so that we can do the button combinations that let us gain access to the menu. So first thing I'm going to do is just pre-tin a few places. So there's R601 right here and 602, and then I'm also going to tin this point right here where we have a tantalum cap, and then finally right over here, this is where the reset line is. And so we get this little flex PCB that is going to go right about here. And now I'm going to go ahead and just solder this into position. Okay, so once we do that, we're going to do like a little fold, like so. And now I'm going to just solder this guy into place. This is probably ground. And then the final point is reset right over here. Okay, so we are basically all set. So that's the end of the soldering that we need to do, and now let's go ahead and get everything finalized. All right, so I've gone ahead and installed both flex cables onto the DC Digital. So here's our main flex, and it goes in with this like darker brown part facing up towards you. And then here's our secondary flex cable, and just like the other one, the brown portion is going to be facing up towards you. So that's about it. Now we're going to go ahead and start reassembling this thing. And I'm going to add a few extras as well. So specifically, I'm going to be adding an optical disc emulator. I have the Terra Onion mode that I'm going to be installing into this one. And then I also am going to be doing a few additional quality of life modifications to it. Okay, so you can see that I have the Dreamcast partially assembled. And what I'm going to do now is go ahead and install the Terra Onion mode. So this is a device that lets you play games off of the hard drive or an SD card instead of using the original disk drive. I'm doing this because this particular unit actually has a dead disk drive, and this is mine. I'm actually building this for myself. So that's just how I want to use it. So yeah, the mode comes with these really crappy feet, and really, I don't know, I'm not a fan of how they provide mounting options for this product, but thankfully LaserBear has this really nice 3D printed mount that you can use for the mode. So that's what we're going to go ahead and use. So doing this is pretty simple. You start by just screwing these 3 screws that are provided with the kit in place. Then you just put the mode into position like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and take this little SD card extender. We're gonna tuck it in and put it into the port right here. There we go. And then the final step really is just going to be screwing this into position. Okay, so the last mods that we're gonna do involve this battery right over here. So normally the Sega Dreamcast has this rechargeable ML2032 battery in this position. And so this is a rechargeable battery, but as you can see, it's soldered directly onto the controller board PCB. And when these go bad, you just have to pop another one on. And honestly, they don't really last that long. So, you know, Voltar has developed this pretty simple mod that allows you to take a normal CR2032 battery and replace it in this position here. So basically what we're gonna do is install a socket here in this place. So I can just take a regular coin cell 2032, put it into here. And then to block the recharging circuit, we're basically going to install a Schottky diode. This is a BAT85 Schottky diode. And we're gonna put it right over here on this leg of the resistor, and the negative stripe of the diode is gonna be facing the PCB, and then we're just gonna solder the other end of the resistor to the top portion of the diode. All right, so let me go ahead and desolder this stuff and install the new components. Okay, so everything is pretty much finished at this point. I've got the rechargeable battery portion blocked off. I've got a 2032 in here instead. We've got the Terra Onion mode so that I can easily load games from an SD card. And of course we have the star of the show, which is the, you know, DC Digital right over here. Overall, I think this came out really nice. The only thing I'd like to maybe add for myself in the future is just to replace the noisy fan with a quiet Noctua fan. But, you know, that's not really a big deal, and I'll try to do that for myself at some other time. All right, so let's go ahead and plug this thing in and see what it does. All right, so the moment of truth has arrived. I've got everything plugged in, so let's power it on and see what happens. All right, that's what I'm talking about. Looking good. So when you first boot up the DC Digital, it's always gonna boot up, I think, in 480i mode. Pretty sure that's how it starts up. And this is basically one day after I got the kit, so it just released. And from what I've read, you should also go ahead and update the firmware. I already went ahead and did that off camera. So let me just go ahead and just boot up anything. I'm gonna pick Soul Calibur because I absolutely love that game. All right, so now let's go ahead and go through some of the features of the new DC Digital. So what I'm gonna do is go into the menu, and to do that, we're gonna hold both triggers, the X, A, and Start button, like so, and it brings up the PixelFX DC Digital menu. So if you are familiar with some of the other PixelFX mods, the experience here is very similar. You have a whole bunch of presets, including all sorts of scan lines, like this, for instance, adaptive scan lines, a digital CRT. You can really do a whole bunch with shadow masks, slot masks, all sorts of things like that, just to simulate a CRT kind of look. So that's very similar to the N64 digital and the PS1 digital. One nice thing too is we can scale this as much or as little as we want. So it's very flexible as compared to the original DC Digital. The D-Interlacer is really nice too. So you have options of not just the Bob D-Interlacer, the blend, weave, and motion adaptive. The motion adaptive looks excellent. And I think on the original DC Digital, the only thing you had was Bob D-interlacing, which is really flickery. And honestly, I mean, there's low latency, but it's kind of distracting to the eyes, especially when it comes to text. Going over here to output resolution, we're already at 1080p. We can go all the way up to 1440p if you want to, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it has tons of features, and it's something that, again, I'm not really qualified to go over. This is something more that I would expect on like Retro RGB's channel or maybe My Life in Gaming's channel. So hopefully some people will have more details on all of the cool features here. But, you know, just to summarize, there's a lot more going on with the second revision of the DC Digital as compared to the first. So I highly recommend it. It looks phenomenal. And then just finally going into the system menu here, we're gonna go to the self-test, and I'll show you guys how to just make sure that your wiring is correct. Okay, so I've exited out to the memory card management menu of the Dreamcast, and so I'm gonna go ahead and just show you how the self-test works. So if you're here, what you gotta do is hit the button combo to access the menu, and then I'm gonna go down here to System and Self-Test, and as you can see here, all of these are showing a heart and not an X. So as long as all of that is looking like how you see here, then that means all your connections are good for a horizontal sync, vertical sync, for the DAC, for pretty much everything. If there's an X on any of those points while you're in this menu, then there's something wrong with, you know, your soldering. Maybe something's just not quite good enough, or maybe something's bridged. So you should go back and check over your work. That's a big reason why I do all those tests with the multimeter, because they can just save you a lot of headache. It takes time to reassemble the Dreamcast, and so it's better to just do all of that while it's still open. All right, guys, so that's it for this week's video. If you guys like this kind of content, then consider subscribing to the channel. I try to have videos out every week whenever possible. I'm also going to be offering installations of the new DC Digital if you guys are interested. And thankfully, these are still in stock. You can go onto the PixelFX website and you can get them right now, and hopefully that stays for a while. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.